So our speaker today is Rita Conrad, and Rita is a scholar and an integral member of our community and a wisdom teacher. So go ahead, Rita.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Gail and Bob. I love that first song about the new world coming. It reminds me of not necessarily a resolution, as Jean was pointing out. I don't like resolutions either, but I saw an article that said what we're aiming for is a re-soul-lution. And as I re-soul and think of your song, Bob and Gail, a song by Janice Stanfield is kind of guiding me through 2022, and it's called Let the Change Begin. And it says, we cannot change the world we see till change begins in you and me. And we change the world around us when the change begins within. So let the change begin. And certainly this theme that we have this month of mystery is part of the change within. As I continue this discussion and I think of that word mystery, two things come to mind right away. The first is how much I love a good mystery. I just get lost in the story. I love the clues. I love the twists and the turns, and it's just great until I get about the middle of the book. And then I really want to just know how it ends. I just want to get to solving it and finishing it. So I'll admit, I either start speed reading or I skip to the end and I read what's going to happen. Now I'll go back and I'll read the rest of the story, but now it's comforting to me. I know where the clues are. I know who did it. I know what to watch for. I know how it's going to end, and I'm okay now. And the second thing that comes to mind when I hear the word mystery is a scene from the 1998 movie Shakespeare in Love. And in this scene, Philip Henslowe is the owner of the Rose Theater, and he owes a great deal of money to Hugh Fennyman. And he will not be able to repay that money until this young upstart writer, Will Shakespeare, overcomes his writer's block and comes forth with the play. So in this scene, Fennyman's henchmen have Henslowe by the throat, and Henslowe just has enough time to gasp out, before you do me bodily harm, allow me to explain about the theater business. The natural condition is one of insurmountable obstacles on the road to imminent disaster. Sounds like life sometimes, right? And Fennyman asks him, so what do we do? And Henslowe replies, nothing. Strangely, it all turns out well. But Fennyman isn't happy with this answer, and he says, but how? And Henslowe simply shrugs and says, I don't know. It's a mystery. It ends well, but how is a mystery. Not so comforting to me as knowing how it's going to end exactly. When we seek to undertake anything new in our lives, we may have the faith to know it will end well, but the thought that it's a mystery how it'll get to that point, what will I have to go through to get to the ending well? Knowing the end before we begin, or wanting to know the end before we begin, that's where we get hung up. And this is where the ego and fear have a field day. Oh my goodness, they come up with all the reasons why we shouldn't even begin what we were thinking of doing. Don't try to do that. Other people have. It's impossible. No one will ever do it. And then you're too young, you're too old, you're too high, you're too tall, whatever it is that we shouldn't, and the reasons why we shouldn't. And suddenly we've let the mystery of how turn what we envision into the impossible. The mystery of how it will end is what can paralyze us and keep us from starting and doing the seemingly impossible. And often that seemingly impossible thing is the thing we're meant to do, the reason we were sent here. But there's a comforting quote from Fridtjof Nansen, a known polar explorer and a person with really a broad spectrum of expertise, that sheds light on how the impossible is done every day. And it is this: The difficult takes a little time. The impossible takes a little longer. It's been written that Nansen's achievements, not only as an explorer, but also as the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work after World War II, prove that the mystery of accomplishing an impossible task is dispelled when we realize that the impossible is simply something that's never been done before. Not that it can't be done, it just hasn't been. And that if we have the patience and tenacity to conquer even the most difficult goals, what was previously unimaginable suddenly comes into the realm of possibility. And we in Unity know we already live in the realm of everything is possible, but the how, the mystery of how everything is possible can still trip us up. I believe Charles Fillmore might have been giving us a big clue to solving this mystery, the mystery of how everything works out well, when he wrote about the 12 powers of man, the 12 great centers of action, as he referred to them, that brought about, to quote Charles, the awakening and the regeneration of the subconscious mind through the superconscious of the Christ mind. And the 12 powers he wrote about are faith, strength, wisdom, love, power, imagination, understanding, will, order, zeal, renunciation, life. In the last decade, there have been subsequent writings based on Fillmore's work, and in the 2015 book, Divine Audacity, Linda Martello-Whitsitt discusses the 12 powers in the context of our divine identity and refers to them as the 12 lights that shine within us. The lights she discusses are mostly the same as the 12 powers, but she refers to them as lights powered by specific spiritual capabilities. Personally, this approach resonated with me a bit more than Charles Fillmore's 12 powers. And I'll admit that as a woman who professionally was in predominantly a male field, the word power has all sorts of connotations to me and triggers, if you will. So thinking of my power was more difficult than thinking about my light. And I really liked the way Martello-Whitsitt did this. So the worldly description of power sometimes overshadows and leaves room for misperception about the spiritual power. So I can recognize the light that lives within me much more easily than the power. And that's just me personally. But that's why this book, Divine Audacity, pardon the pun, really turned the light on for me about those 12 powers. So Martello-Whitsitt writes, my intention is that we become so aware of our spiritual nature and capacities that we walk through unwanted circumstances in the same way we walk through wanted circumstances, shining the light all the while. Our divine identity can be our first resource rather than our last resort. That's a pretty effective way to take some of the mystery out of life and how it will turn out well, in my opinion. She describes Divine Audacity, the title of her book, as bold spiritual living under the radical premise that I am divine. My nature is one with the divine nature of God. I am able to boldly express the highest spiritual principles in the middle of everyday situations. And I might add, and be able to do it all the time in everyday situations. I dare to ignore the way things are and what cannot be done, bringing about the seemingly impossible. I suspend belief in the limitations that seem inherent in human existence to stretch beyond my known capacity. I disregard appearances to hold a vision of what can be so steadily that it must manifest. And this paragraph really struck me. Seems like such a powerful affirmation to me. She writes, with divine audacity, I am the light of the world, shining brightly. In my presence, others remember their divine identity. In my presence, others heal the illusion of separation. In my presence, others stand tall and behave humanely. They snap back from self-pity and self-derision to claim their spiritual capabilities, their spiritual capacities. In my presence, others sense and act from their essential goodness. In my presence, others come home to themselves, the self, with a capital S. That is not their personality, but their divine identity. She encourages a fearless overcoming of only human tendencies to be the light of the world. So I wanted to take a little closer look at these lights that she talked about, and I thought I'd, bring you along with me. I thought it might be nice to get out of Unity Zoom Church for a little bit and take a trip over to Unity Village, to the prayer garden there. And then you might want to put on your coats before we go, because today it's 37 degrees in Unity Village Prayer Garden. But here we are at the garden. Of course, this picture was taken in a much warmer time, but the prayer garden itself is has 12 patios, and each focusing on one of Fillmore's 12 powers. But I'll continue to refer to these, as Martella Whitsitt does, as the 12 lights. Our walk goes clockwise, and we're going to start here with understanding and then go around and conclude here with release. And at each of the prayer patios is a beautiful sculpture done by Barry Eisenhart, who you see pictured here. And as we walk today, if something resonates with you about a particular light, be sure to take note of that so that you can come back to it later and contemplate it in more depth. So let's begin our walk through the garden. The light of understanding. This first sculpture we encounter is the light of understanding, and it's a companion to imagination, which we'll see shortly on our path. Both have these bubbles that you see here that represent ideas. With the light of understanding, as we begin to understand ideas, things settle and our focus becomes clearer. The light of understanding is powered by comprehension, realization, and insight. So as you look at this sculpture, affirm, I claim understanding now. I spiritually know and comprehend how to use my powers and the light to be the best I can be. Next is the light of will. This sculpture represents the ability to choose between two options. The center represents a strong inner force, and the light of will is powered by choice, commitment, willingness. Affirm, I claim will now. I use will to make wise choices. I affirm my capacity to commit to a path. I am willing to stretch beyond perceived limits. The light of imagination. In this sculpture, a nutshell, these same bubbles, as we saw in a previous sculpture. In this sculpture, a nutshell breaks open and expands like a tree growing upwards. Ideas are represented by these bubbles as they were prior to this. And they're bubbles that are multiplying, a reminder that all things are possible. The light of imagination is powered by conception, vision, and embodiment. And we affirm, I claim imagination now. I claim divine ideas. then visualize and imagine living my divine identity. The light of faith. As this points towards the heaven, this sculpture through the interior circle invites us to turn inward, to connect to a deep well of faith. The light of faith is powered by perception, conviction, and expectancy. And we affirm this: I claim faith now. I believe with confidence and conviction that I can use all my powers at the highest level of consciousness in order to be the best person I can be. And as we reach the midpoint of our walk, we come to the light of zeal, which of course is represented by a flame. This flame represents our ability to ignite our passion and our enthusiasm. The light of zeal is powered by enthusiasm, audacity, devotion. And so we affirm, I claim zeal now. I use zeal to be passionate and enthusiastic about being a light to the world. I am enthusiastic, audacious, and devoted. The light of power. This sculpture represents speech with the shape symbolizing a tongue. It's meant to remind us of the power of our spoken word. And this light is powered by concentration, self-mastery, and authority. As you gaze on this sculpture, affirm, I claim power now. I use power to control my thoughts, words, and feelings, to master divine ideas and be the best I can be. Of course, one of my favorite lights is the light of love, and this is symbolized by two hearts that are intertwined, signifying eternal harmony and unity. The light of love is powered by magnetism, harmony, and unity. And in this light, we affirm, I claim love now. I use love to attract myself to what is highest and most spiritual, blessing me, all people, and all of life. The light of wisdom. The intertwining nature of this sculpture represents working through, evaluating, discerning, and resolving. And right here, you see the pearl of wisdom in the center of this sculpture. That's what we're seeking, to find the pearl of wisdom. Judgment, discernment, intuition power the light of wisdom. And with this sculpture, we affirm, I claim wisdom now. I use wisdom to discern how to apply what I understand so that I can live in the heavenly state of harmony, peace, and well-being. The light of strength. The foundation of this sculpture is very thick and solid and stable. As it intertwines, it picks up the theme right here of Atlas holding the earth. It's meant to remind us of our ability to endure, resist, and persevere. So it's powered by stability, courage, and tenacity. And looking upon this sculpture, we affirm, I claim strength now. Regardless of the circumstances, I appreciate my limitless power and stay the course, centered in truth. We're nearly at the end of our path now, and we encounter the light of order. The elements in this sculpture represent the sequential order and inherent structure of life, showing the beauty of balance. The light of order is powered by organization, adjustment, and evolution. And so we say, I claim order now. By aligning and organizing my surroundings, my thoughts, and my feelings, I easily sense where to adjust my mindset or course of action. My consciousness is ever unfolding. The next to the last light is the light of life. This sculpture is based on a wave, and it reminds us that the circle of life is fragile. You see this part right here that is a thin, delicate point of connection. The circle of life is fragile. The protective cradle holds these two circles, representing cells that form life. And animation, vitality, and presence power this light of life. I claim life now. I am forever flowing in forward, onward, and upward ways. I am vitally alive in mind, body, and spirit. I am fully present, a radiating light. And in my presence, others rise to awareness of their spiritual nature. And finally, we come to the light of release. I love this sculpture. This is one of my favorites. Spiraling up and letting go. Working through all this intertwining of working through, and finally bringing to the surface, in this very point, the things we need to release. The light of release is powered by cleansing, renunciation, repentance. With this light, affirm, I claim release now. I let go of anything that no longer serves me. With every breath, I release the moment past, that I might be wholeheartedly present now. And so our walk in the garden comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed that, even with 37 degrees. I'm grateful we don't have 37 degrees here. But that's, that's a lot of light to consider. That's a lot of light that we have. It was once surmised that we only use a fraction of our brain, and that idea has since been debunked. But along those same lines, I'd ask you, so how much of your light do you think you're using? How much of those 12 lights? There are some of you here at Five Cities who I know use all of those lights very well. In fact, I think some of you have solar panels on your heads because there's so much light coming out of you. But it's good for us to remember that no matter what our state of illumination at any given moment, in divine audacity, Martella Mlitzit says we should cast aside this notion that we need to develop these capabilities. She reminds us, and I love this phrase, that we come fully loaded to this place with original blessing, with the spiritual powers, our abilities, everything we need to be the light. We are fully loaded, ready to go. We are not weak or helpless or lost. What is needed is that we know, call upon, and direct what is within, focusing that light on the change we wish to see in our lives and in the world, to make it through challenging moments, to do what we are meant to do, taking the impossible out of the equation to solve the seeming mystery of life. Admitting our divine identity requires us to draw from, yield to, and express the one power consciously every day. We have to live from this realization, and that requires audacity. And speaking of the impossible, so what seems more possible than living our divine identity every single moment of our existence? Conquering the mystery of the how, knowing something will turn out well. So in case you're like me, and I think this idea is so huge that I can't think of how to begin this. I've come up with, 3 little ideas on that for you to consider, and perhaps, it'll inspire you to think even greater ideas. And here's my 3 little ideas about how to do that. And I just lost my, hang on a second. The shifting between Zoom and, that's always a mystery to me. All right, here we go. So here's 3 little ideas of how to do that. The very first is to yield to your divine identity. We need to stop struggling against or running away from all that's within us. You know, I think all of us have felt a bit down at one time or another over the past few years about what's happening around us. We've all been hearing about the great spiritual depression that seems to be occurring. And I recently read that all depression stems from resistance, the obstruction of the flow of awareness, the attempt to limit the unlimited. So stop struggling against your divine identity and relax into your lights. Consider each of the 12 lights within you and meditate on them individually and reflect on how you have used them in your life. Which ones haven't you used? What actions might you take to direct them more effectively in your life? For example, for the light of understanding, here's one idea from the Divine Audacity book, and it is that think and write about a time when you misunderstood another person's words or actions and later learned what he or she actually meant, and it had nothing to do naturally with how you perceive them. What strategies have you developed or could you employ to avoid jumping to conclusions and instead seek understanding? So take a look at each of those lights within yourself. The second idea, speaking of others and our perceptions of others, another idea is to name the specific light in others. And this reminds me of something that Timber said to us months ago about name the emotion, name it. So when we, instead of just saying, I see the light in you, what's the specific light you do see? When you think of zeal, who do you see? Charles Fillmore suggested that each of the apostles represented one of the 12 powers. So who is in your life that represents each of these 12 lights that Martella writes about? Who is in your life that represents each of these to you? And if you can't see a specific light in yourself, think of that someone else who you think does shine this light and use them as inspiration. So when I think of my mom, I think of the light of strength, powered by stability, courage, and tenacity. When I think of my beloved husband, I think of the light of wisdom, powered by judgment, discernment, intuition. When I think of my son, I think of the light of imagination, powered by conception, vision, embodiment. And if you are truly, truly committed to shining your lights, to using all of your spiritual capabilities, play this game with people you do not like. You'll be amazed at how the list of people you dislike dwindles. You will see light in all sorts of people you've never thought had it. And once we find one light in them, it gives us a foothold to look for more. It gives us a place to begin appreciating and talking to one another. And finally, to shine your lights, to dispel the mystery of life. Live as if you cannot fail. Singer-songwriter Janice Stanfield wrote a beautiful song that I listen to a lot. And it's along this theme of let the change begin. And the song is called If I Were Brave. And she writes, what would I do if I knew I could not fail? If I believed, would the wind always fill up my sail? How far would I go? What could I achieve? Trusting the hero in me. If I were brave, I'd walk the razor's edge where the true believers dare to tread. I'd never lose faith, even when losing my way. What step would I take today if I were brave? What if we're all meant to do what we secretly dream? What would you ask if you knew you could have anything? Like the mighty oak sleeps in the heart of a seed, are there miracles in you and me? You know there are. If I refuse to listen to the voice of fear, would the voice of courage whisper in my ear? Maybe this is what I'd hear. I am brave enough to move ahead where true believers dare to tread. Never lose faith, even when losing my way. What step will I take today? I am brave. Whenever you are puzzled, afraid, or seemingly lost in the mystery of life, the thought of overcoming the impossible, you get lost in that thought of how to do that. Remember, you came into this world fully loaded with light, with a broad spectrum of capabilities. The mystery of how you are going to work through something, how something will end well, you know how to shine one or more of those lights on it. Everything in this world begins. It begins in and it exists because of your light. So we must live always rising from within ourselves. To bring the kingdom of heaven about now is about living as the infinite divine in the now with divine audacity, using all of our 12 lights. And so it is.